The signing of Tyron Smith by the Jets may not be everything the media is making it out to be, but it may be exactly what the Jets need. I'll explain what that means today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, March 18th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, late Friday night, the news broke. The New York Jets agreed to terms with left tackle Tyron Smith, a guy who's been to the Pro Bowl 8 times, a guy who's been one of the top tackles in the NFL. It is a one-year contract worth up to $20 million, but up to is the operative phrase there. Because the Jets, by reports that have come out, are only guaranteeing $6.5 million to Smith. The other $13.5 million is all based on incentives. We're going to break down in great detail what this signing means for the New York Jets on today's show. You know, it's funny because the reactions to this are so predictable. The reactions to the first couple of days of free agency when the Jets were not that active were predictable, where everybody's panicking, where you hear in the national media, what are the Jets doing? And I did the show last week and I told everybody, relax. The offseason's a marathon, not a sprint. Then the Jets signed Tyron Smith. And the reactions have totally changed. Now, this one signing takes the Jets from what are they doing to the Jets are dominating the offseason. And of course, if you're a Jets fan, I don't need to tell you this. It's not always the case that you sign a big player that you win the offseason. Doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. We know that. So on today's show, we're going to talk about what this signing actually means and what it doesn't actually mean. Because we've been through this before with the Jets. We've been through off seasons where they haven't done a whole lot and people panic. We've been through off seasons where they win the off season and things don't always work out. So let's get down to business. Let's talk about what this actually means. Let's let the hype die down. Now, as we all know, the Jets had a glaring need at the left tackle position. And we've talked about this in the weeks leading up to free agency, that the Jets' options were all flawed in some way or another. To a certain degree, there was no perfect option. The question was, which of the flawed options would the Jets take? What were the pros and cons of each option? And in the case of Tyron Smith, what I think the Jets have done, they brought in the option with the absolute highest upside because Tyron Smith is still playing at a very high level. He was a second-team All-Pro in 2023. This is a guy who's still a great left tackle. And a great left tackle changes your offense. A great left tackle has a multiplier effect. It impacts the rest of your offensive line. It impacts your quarterback. Listen, we've talked a lot on this show about how Aaron Rodgers' mobility is going to be reduced in 2024. Aaron Rodgers is going to be a pocket passer for the most part. And of course, there are going to be plays where he'll be able to move left or right. And I'm sure people will mock me when in those instances happen. But the point is, look, that's going to happen less than it has at any point in his career because he's 40. His mobility was already declining in the final Green Bay days. And now he's coming off an Achilles injury. And Achilles injuries for guys in their late 30s, in their 40s, it just takes your mobility away. So what the Jets need to do is the Jets need to make sure if Aaron Rodgers can be a pocket passer, they need to make sure that the offensive line is great in front of him. And now, when Tyron Smith plays, if he maintains his level of play, you know that Aaron Rodgers' blind side is probably going to be protected. But I think the move potentially has a bigger impact. And it's because of the guy who's playing next to him, John Simpson, who the Jets just got from Baltimore. And, when the Jets got him, I was at first a little skeptical. And then the more I read about him, the more I study on Simpson, the more I'm like, okay, let's wait and see on this guy because there are some positives here. But one of the things I definitely came away thinking with Simpson is that, he's not good enough to dominate on his own. He's the kind of guy who's going to need a great left tackle next to him because we've seen this over and over. Sometimes you're as good as the guy next to you. Sometimes you play at a level where you're not great, you're not terrible. You'll play as well as the guy next to you. Laken Tomlinson is a great example of that. Laken Tomlinson, when he was playing next to a future Hall of Famer in Trent Williams in San Francisco, looked really good. Suddenly he comes to the Jets and he's playing next to guys like, late career Dwayne Brown. Mekhi Becton, it doesn't look so good. So not only does this lock down the left tackle position for the New York Jets, but it also potentially makes your left guard situation better because Simpson now playing next to Tyron Smith stands to look really good. Financially, you have to like this deal for the Jets. This deal is risky for the Jets. We're going to talk about a little bit later why this deal is risky for the Jets. It's not a huge financial risk because the Jets really did a good job protecting themselves, and reports indicate that they were not expecting Smith to take this deal because it's such a deal that's structured in a favorable way for the New York Jets because they're only paying him $6.5 million. Of course, if it doesn't work out, that's $6.5 million you don't get back. But for a left tackle with the upside of Tyron Smith, to only guarantee $6.5 million is pretty good. And yeah, it could get up to $20 million. But if it gets up to $20 million, he's hit all of his incentives. And if he hits all of his incentives, we can wager that he's probably going to be worth $20 million because this is an upper echelon left tackle. This is a guy who's still a top-notch left tackle. And, look, I've been very critical of the Jets the last 2 years because, I don't like the all-in mindset that they've had. I don't like the turn to older players. In fact, Smith is a guy I've mentioned many times on the show, a guy I'd probably try and stay away from in free agency. Now, let me address that discrepancy because here I am saying good things about it. A big part of the reason I said stay away from Smith was I did not expect the Jets to be able to get him for $6.5 million. There's such an offensive line crisis in this league that I figured somebody would just give him a crazy contract. So the calculus for me changes once we're talking about, and this is true of any player, virtually any player, where if I say I don't like a guy, it's because I'm estimating the price is going to be too high. If I like a guy, it's because I'm estimating the price is going to be pretty low. And sometimes my estimations are wrong because you never know what the teams in this league are thinking. But I think financially, for where the Jets are, I mean, again, no perfect options here. Smith is, not a slam dunk here, but if we're looking at the options that were in front of the Jets, it's not the worst move. Let me rephrase it. I was about to say it's not the worst move in the world. That's probably about as well as you could do. Let's put it that way. It's not only is it not the worst move, it's probably the best the Jets could have done under the circumstances. And if you're heading into the next season with the older guys on your offensive line, at least let them be like Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, where they're in their 30s, they're in their mid 30s, but they're still playing at a high level. And asking Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses to hold up over a season, it's very different from going into 2023 with 38-year-old Dwayne Brown. It would have been different if we were talking like a 33-year-old Dwayne Brown, but it's different from heading into the next season with 38-year-old Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton and asking both of those guys to play a full 17-game season like the Jets did last year. Asking both, asking one of them to get through 17 games and play well, that was a lot. Asking both, that was just crazy. You at least see a path where this offensive line could be very good. It's not a guarantee. This is not not a lock that this is going to be like an above average offensive line, but you're at least improving your odds. There's a realistic path where this offensive line could be quite good. A year ago, it was kind of like, let's hope everything works out. Let's know if this works, if this happens and that happens, maybe we could be like borderline average. The Jets' offensive line ceiling right now is much higher than it was a year ago. This has a chance to be an above average offensive line. If it's an above average offensive line with Rodgers back there, smart as ever in the pocket, with Brees, maybe an offensive line that could actually open some holes for Brees. And Brees almost had 1,000 yards last year with an offensive line that couldn't do anything for him. You start to see the pathway where this offense could be pretty good. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to some of the things that this signing's not. I mean, the Jets are getting a lot of praise in the media for this move, and some of it's fair, but this is not necessarily the complete grand slam it's made out to be. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we continue on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is the daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes as needed. And as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get local insights from MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Today on Locked On Jets, we're focusing on Tyron Smith. The Jets agreed to terms with the 8-time Pro Bowl tackle late Friday night, a one-year contract worth up to $20 million, but only $6.5 million guaranteed, according to reports. So a deal where the Jets are really rolling the dice, a calculated gamble. I think that's the best way to put it. It's a calculated gamble. And, when you sign a big player, when you make a big name signing, like you get effusive praise from the national media and part of it, I think, is just like, it gives them content. It gives them something to talk about. Now, if you're a Jets fan, you know that there's a difference between winning the offseason and winning games. When it comes to the offseason, the Jets are the Chiefs. The Jets are the dynasty of the last decade in the NFL of winning the offseason, making the flashy moves. And as we all know, those moves don't always work out. And I think that this is a calculated gamble for the New York Jets. But I think we need to acknowledge that there's some downsides to it. There's some potential downsides, at least. This is one of those things. If you want somebody to just go on, the Jets have dominated the offseason, well, I'm trying to give you a realistic view of what's good and what's not so good about any given move for the Jets. Again, calculated gamble. But I think we need to acknowledge there's a reason Smith is available for only $6.5 million guaranteed. First of all, he's in his mid-30s. Now, at 33 years old, he's still playing at a high level. There are outliers. Usually players in the NFL, once they hit 30, it's all downhill. There are outliers. And the outliers are typically the absolutely exceptional players. That's because, part of it's because they're starting at a level so high that even in decline, they're playing pretty well. I have to say, even with Smith, I'm not even sure he's in decline when he's on the field. He still was a second team All-Pro a year ago. And, he's still like one of the best left tackles in the league when he's on the field. But there is a risk. There's always a risk when you're talking about a player in his mid-30s. It's also true of Morgan Moses that the potential for decline is always there. The bigger issue with Smith, though, and I think you know what it is we always use the phrase when he's on the field to describe how he dominates. He misses a lot of games. He's missed 37 games over the last 4 seasons. He has not played a full slate of games without missing one since 2015. So, as players age, it becomes more difficult to rebound. The hits add up. The bumps and bruises are more difficult to recover from. Look, this is a risk. And I don't think I'd be honest with you sitting here telling you it was not a risk. It's a risk the Jets needed to take because of the situation they're in at the tackle position. We talked about last week how their 2020 draft class did not pan out at all. It looks like nobody from the 2020 draft class is going to get a second contract with this team. And if they do, it's maybe a guy like Ashton Davis who just gets re-signed as a backup. The Jets got no long-term starters out of the 2020 draft. And most notable from that draft was their top pick, Mekhi Becton, who has not panned out. And when you miss early in the draft, you start needing to take calculated risks like this. So, it's one thing to say that, hey, this is probably the best the Jets could have done. But we also need to discuss how the Jets got into this position because, there's a lot of praise for Joe Douglas for this move. And look, if it pans out, it's a good move for the Jets. But I think, why do we get into this situation? Well, it's because the Jets are in a tough spot because the Jets put themselves in a position where they have to take risks like this. And it's not a great position to be in. Do I love the idea that the Jets are, starting a couple of tackles in their mid-30s? No. Do I like the depth of this team right now on the offensive line? No, I do not. These are things that have added up. And, when you're trying to do this thing short term, when you're trying to kind of microwave a Super Bowl type of team, you have to roll the dice on guys. It's difficult to fix all of the problems the Jets had in one offseason. Now, it's not as hard to make the team look better on paper because right now, if you're looking on paper at this offensive line, you're saying, okay, Tyron Smith, that he's really good. John Simpson, okay, well, he's an ascending player. Joe Tittman, pretty good as a rookie. AVT, if he stays healthy. Another guy, if he stays healthy, looks pretty good. Morgan Moses, we know he's a solid, probably average type right tackle. On paper, the line looks good. And of course, the games aren't played on paper. And the Jets have risks. This offensive line's not played together. We don't know exactly what Simpson's going to be. Smith and Moses are older. Smith and AVT are both pretty big injury risk, although I'll be honest, I am bullish on AVT's ability to stay healthy going forward. I think AVT suffered a couple of freak injuries, but it's a risk. It's still a risk. It's not like the slam dunk people are making it out to be. It's a move that has high upside. Again, if you compare this line with what it looked like a year ago, I'm taking 2024 line any day of the week. I'll roll with this line any day over the Becton, Dwayne Brown tackle situation. But it's not the slam dunk it's being made out to be. And I think, as we all know, like offseason hype for moves that you make only goes so far. New York Jets need to go out and win games. And I guess that's for me, like, this is what it boils down to is, like, I've been here so long. We've been here before where the Jets are making all these flashy moves in the offseason. And that doesn't mean it's going to fail. Like, one of the things that frustrated me last year was it wasn't just that the Jets were going all in. It wasn't just that they were adding a bunch of really old players. It's that they weren't like adding guys who could make a difference. If you're going to go all in, go all in. And I don't love the idea of going all in, but don't halfway it. If you're going to go all in, do it. Don't blow your cap space on guys like Allen Lazard. Use your cap space on guys like Tyron Smith, guys who are elite level players. If you're going to rely on old players, don't rely on guys like late career Dwayne Brown. Don't rely on guys like Randall Cobb and Laken Tomlinson. Rely on guys in their 30s like Tyron Smith, maybe Mike Williams. We'll get to that in a little bit. This is at least a more coherent vision, but it is a risk. I've heard people say, like, on Friday after the Jets made this signing that, well, if it goes wrong, you can't really blame the Jets because this is a move that made sense. Well, it made sense for how we got here, but there are plenty of red flags with this move. And how we got here is an important part of the discussion because the Jets have not hit on enough draft picks. You don't make the teams that are satisfied with young left tackles, the teams with star left tackles who they've drafted aren't making this move. The Jets are kind of pressed into a situation where they had to roll the dice on Tyron Smith. Again, high upside. Look, this is a heck of a lot better than rolling with Dwayne Brown. There's no question about that. And if it works, it could really work. Jets could have an upper echelon offensive line if everything clicks. But there still are a number of ifs on this line. And I think we need to acknowledge that there's, this is not necessarily the absolutely amazing move that, the no downside move. Look, you can see the downside. You can see how this could go sideways. You hope it goes well. There's more upside than the moves the Jets were making a year ago. So I want to emphasize that. But we do need to acknowledge that there's, this is not all sunshine. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the other Jets' glaring need of this offseason, and it's a need that maybe they're going to try and address this week. They have a prominent free agent coming in for a visit. It's Chargers receiver Mike Williams. I think he'd be a great fit. I'll tell you why as we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. You should not have to worry when you buy tickets to the next big event. Game Time's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time has so many benefits. They give you the view from all seats in the venue. They have a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. I've used Game Time myself. I've used it to go to football, to tennis, to a Broadway musical, and I found great seats last minute. I couldn't believe some of the deals I've gotten on it. I not only do I recommend Game Time here, I'm actually a customer. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, locked on, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. Jets have a free agent visit coming in on Monday evening. It's Mike Williams, a former first-round pick of the Los Angeles Chargers, guy who's hitting free agency for the first time in his career, coming off a torn ACL, but still pretty high-end receiver. And I think a guy who really fits well what the Jets need. Garrett Wilson, I view him as kind of more of like a route-running technician. He's not small, but he's a little undersized. He kind of struggles with press coverage off the line of scrimmage. Certainly not a great contested catch guy. And, I hear people over and over say Garrett's got to get better with contested catches. And I just don't think it's ever going to be part of his game, because the way he gets better at contested catches is to bulk up. And that's always a risky move with the type of receiver Garrett Wilson is, because if you add a lot of muscle, maybe you slow yourself down. Maybe you're not as good at the stuff you do well. Mike Williams came out of Clemson. He was always a great contested catch receiver, a big target, a guy you can throw the ball up to down the field. And I've been a skeptic of the idea that like receivers need to stylistically match. I think it's more just about raw talent. But in a perfect world, you find a player who's a good stylistic match to Garrett, and Mike Williams could be the guy. Of course, risky again, another guy who's hitting 30. He's coming off a serious injury. He's coming off an ACL injury. So you never know how guys are going to bounce back from that. That's part of the reason he's available. But a guy who I think makes a lot of sense for the Jets. And if you look through his career, it's not like he's had a ton of serious injuries. It's not like this is a guy who's been banged up a lot. So that's one thing I look at is, guy coming off a serious injury. Is it more of a freak occurrence, or is it more of a he can't stay on the field type of thing? And for Williams, it seems like that injury last year was more of a freak occurrence. He doesn't seem like a guy who's particularly banged up a lot. Not a guy who's a perennial 1,000-yard receiver, but a guy who usually is, close to 1,000 yards. So I would say he's probably more of a number 2 guy, a second banana. Well, Jets happen to have a number 1 receiver in Garrett Wilson, so that's no problem. And looking at the guys who are available, I don't really see a lot of guys who necessarily move the needle. I like Tyler Boyd. I don't like Tyler Boyd really alone fixes the Jets' problems at the wide receiver position. I think Mike Williams, you draft Mike Williams, suddenly you're in a good position because, and this is one of the things I've talked about in the weeks leading up to free agency. When I want the Jets to go into into the NFL draft, I don't want the Jets to go in a position where it's like we desperately need a tackle or we desperately need a receiver. Now they've done a good job with tackle because now you're entering the draft and you're saying we don't need a tackle. It's like if no tackle's available at the point we're drafting, if there's no good value at the tackle position, we don't need to reach now because we have Smith and we have Moses. Now, Jets should not take tackle off the board because the 2 tackles were 33 years old and in the last year of their contract. So, once again, heading into next offseason, the Jets are going to need to find 2 new tackles or re-sign the guys that they've got. And they're both in their mid-30s. So thinking long-term, tackle should not be off the board by any stretch of the imagination. But now you're not in a situation where if all the top tackles are gone, that you're reaching for somebody at 10 just to fill a need. That's the position you want to be in. The Jets are still there at wide receiver. And we've seen a lot of the good guys go off the board so far. And we'll see. And I'm always a preacher of patience when it comes to dealing with the offseason because again, it's everybody freaked out. Think about where we were Wednesday when everybody was losing their mind because the Jets hadn't done a whole lot. And I remember I did a show last week. I said that it's a long haul. Well, we are, however, getting to the point where there aren't a lot of receivers who necessarily would make a big difference for the New York Jets. Now, if you sign Mike Williams, I think you're in a situation where you're fine at wide receiver. You could say, you know what, it's okay. We can live with this. This is pretty decent on paper. But if a guy like a Rome Odunze falls to 10, you could say, you know what, we're going to draft Rome because Williams, is not a long-term player for us. We can, he maybe can help us this year, but then he's probably not going to be with us for the long run. So again, you can now focus. If you sign Mike Williams, now you can focus on longer term. You can focus on building your team up, finding impact players. And there's less criticism you're going to face if you trade down, which is still something the Jets would be looking to do because they don't have a second-round pick this year. And second-round picks are really, really valuable. Second-round picks are some of the best value picks in the draft. And so I think you don't want to overpay for a guy coming off a torn ACL. But I think the signing would be really important for the Jets because at least at that point you could say, you know what, we feel pretty good with what we've got in the 2 areas that were problem areas heading into the offseason. Having Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses is not going to prevent you from drafting a tackle. Adding Mike Williams is not going to necessarily mean you're out of the running for a wide receiver. But you're less desperate. You never want to enter the NFL draft from a position of desperation. Now, one other thing I'm going to say about Mike Williams. Reports are that this visit is coming in. He's coming in Monday evening. So if you're listening to this show at noon and you're freaking out, why haven't the Jets signed Mike Williams yet? He's not even coming in until the evening. Here's another thing I'm going to say. This is just general advice. Enough with the phrase, don't let him leave the building. Mike Williams is a grown man. He can go wherever he wants. The Jets can't keep him in the building if he doesn't want to stay in the building. That phrase gets thrown around every year in free agency. Don't let him leave the building. What do you want the Jets to do? Like lock the doors and prevent him from walking out? He can leave the building. He's got other free agent visits lined up this week. If you're Mike Williams and this is the first time you're really hitting the open market, you probably want to hear what everybody has to say. You probably want to hear other offers. He's got a visit at Carolina lined up. He's got a visit at Pittsburgh lined up. Why wouldn't you want to hear every offer? If the Jets don't let him leave the building, it may be because they gave him a crazy contract, whereas a reasonable contract might be all it takes to get it done in the long run. If you wait a couple days and you let him leave the building, maybe he's paid less for him than you would in a situation where you don't let him leave the building. You give him a crazy contract in order to prevent him from leaving the building. Enough with don't let him leave the building. He can leave the building. The question is whether the Jets can land him on a reasonable contract. And that's the hope. If they do, you can start to see you can start to see it. Jets get Mike Williams in here. You can see a path where this could work. It's not a guarantee. The Jets will be on NFL Network and ESPN. They'll be declared one of the winners of free agency again. We'll be talking about how they had an amazing offseason. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. That's not the point, though. There's always risk involved when you're dealing with free agent signings. But if the Jets get Mike Williams in here, you at least go into the draft less desperate, and you're able to focus on adding long-term pieces. You can at least focus on what the draft is there for. And that's, again, the long run. That's about building up your team, making the right moves, and hopefully finding the balance between winning now and leaving yourself with the pieces you need to compete in the future. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.